Okie doke. I think now we are officially going to get started. Hi, everybody. This is Cindy Blaine with California Relief. All of us at Relief really hope that you're well and taking care of yourself, hunkering down at home. At the risk of sounding like your mom, everybody's washing their hands and washing the doorknobs. We set up this webinar a couple weeks ago, and things have changed a lot in the last week. Way back when we started it up, it wasn't a mandatory shutdown, and people were trying to decide whether or not they should be having tree planting events, or if they were going to have tree planting events, because everybody kind of thought we should keep going. How could we do it safely? That has all changed. It's a little bit of a mixed message now, too, because they're saying that we can take walks outside, so that still begs the question about tree plantings. And then there's also the whole issue about the financial stability of all of our organizations as we move forward when events can't happen, or grants are supposed to end at a certain time and those events can't be completed in that amount of time. People who were working hourly aren't working, and so they're not getting a paycheck. So instead of simply an open conversation around how we're going to stay safe during tree planting and other events, we've invited speakers to address several different issues. One, we're going to talk a little bit about coronavirus itself and from the medical perspective. And then we're going to talk about how to handle the emotional aspects of such a big life disruption, because some of the research shows that when you've got all this disruption, it's very hard to take in information, and that can hinder some decisions. We're also going to talk about what's happening on the policy side, state and federal, regarding financial actions and support from the government. And then Chuck will wrap it up with talking about, hold on a second, let me move this slider thing here. And then Chuck will wrap it up in talking about what's going on with relief grants and the grants that we get through CAL FIRE. So again, thank you very much for joining us. One more time, we are not going to do this as a regular conversation. We're going to do it with questions. So on the right-hand side of your screen, you have that taskbar, and there's a place called questions. Type your questions in there, please, not under chat. And I think that's all I have. And with that, I'd like to introduce Desiree Backman, who is the board president at California Relief and is also a public health professional working at UC Davis Institute for Population Health. Desiree?
Thank you, Cindy, and welcome everyone. As Cindy says, we all acknowledge that these are challenging times for us all. And yet when I think about the power of the work that you all do and the power of our green infrastructure, we're so blessed that it's there. So not only do we experience the environmental co-benefits that trees provide, but they're inextricably linked to improving our health, our physical health, our mental and social well-being, and beyond. So I want to thank you for all of the work that you do to enhance, continue to grow, and strengthen our green infrastructure, because now more than ever before, we need it. It's so good for our mental well-being and our physical states, and we need that in order to be fortified in this pandemic crisis that we find ourselves in. We're going to get through it. And again, I wanted to salute all of you on the call and thank you for the amazing contributions that you make to our health and well-being. I'd like to turn the conversation over to Dr. Neal Kohatsu, and he's going to provide us with a brief update on COVID-19. Dr. Kohatsu?
Thanks, Dr. Badman. I just would like to focus on 4 points related to COVID-19, and hopefully not ones that you're so familiar with. I'm not going to cover the CDC recommendations, including hand washing and social distancing, because you've seen it a lot and are practicing it. That just 4 points for reflection, and which I think will relate to other speakers' comments. The first is that I am glad that everyone on this phone call is taking this threat very seriously. As you know, the governor basically did a shelter-in-place order other than essential trips for food or medications, but asked that the rest of social activities throughout the state be curtailed. And the reason he took this action, and it came as an order from the state health officer, is that I looked at the data over the last couple of days. Our epidemic curve in California and in the United States looks very close to Italy, which is suffering through right now a complete health crisis in terms of access, and the entire country is shut down trying to manage COVID-19. We are trying to get ahead of things and avoid what is happening now in Italy, which is a massive overtaking of the healthcare system. It's overwhelmed. South Korea is probably the best example of the so-called flattening the curve. They did very aggressive testing early on and aggressive contact tracing and implemented public health measures that we are seeing. Dr. Anthony Fauci, who is one of the leading virologists in the world, head of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease at NIH, has said that even with the aggressive actions that California and New York are taking and others, we won't really know the impact for potentially several weeks. But if we didn't take this aggressive public health action, we wouldn't be able to flatten the curve, so to speak. Just three other points. The information is changing on a daily basis, sometimes an hourly basis. Early on, there was basically suggestions that young people were not getting COVID-19. It's actually not proven to be true. There are a fair number of cases that have been seen in the U.S. and fatalities. Basically, people of all ages can get COVID-19. So that information has really changed over the last week or so. It is true that those who are older, and particularly in the 7th and 8th, 9th decade, are more susceptible and have a higher mortality rate. But everyone, including young people, need to be concerned about this. As Desiree noted and Cindy noted, walking, particularly in nature, I think is very beneficial and is still approved by all the public health recommendations that I've been able to see. By that, of course, we're not talking about on a summer day in Central Park in New York where it's actually quite crowded, but we're talking about maintaining the 6-foot distancing, and hopefully in an area that has very few people. That's what a safe walk is about. And finally, something that has gotten a little attention but not enough attention is that blood donation still continues and is desperately needed. As you can imagine, blood donations have fallen off precipitously. I looked at the Food and Drug Administration website, which oversees the blood supply in the country, and they noted that proper precautions are standard operating procedure. They apply to COVID-19, but are in place at all times in blood collection, which is safe collection to keep everyone safe, including the donors, screening both physically and with monitoring temperatures. So blood donation is encouraged as a critical resource at this time. So I'm going to leave it at that, and I'll be happy to answer any questions in the Q&A session, but I'll stop for now.
Thank you very much, Neal. I hadn't even thought about blood donations. So again, just as Neal said, what we're going to do is we're going to have everybody talk, and then we're going to have more questions through the question box at the end. and it is all changing rapidly. Next up, we're going to have Katie McCleary, who Katie has worked with, and I'm going to switch forward on our slides. Here we see the network, who we have out in our audience today. Here's Katie's slide. Katie came and consulted with California Relief on storytelling for one of our grants and has done other work with us. But Katie also has done work relating to emotional impacts and how you can handle that as a nonprofit. So without further ado, Katie, I'm turning it over to you. And just, Katie, we're going to be very low tech here. When you want the next slide, please just say next slide, okay?
Perfect. Thank you, Cindy. Hi, everyone. So my role is essentially, I'm a writer and a storyteller, and I'm also a leadership coach. And a lot of what I do in my leadership coach practice is really talk to leaders about their presence and about how they show up. And leaders, and really all people, right, are constantly sort of navigating pressure that we feel every day, right? We're overwhelmed. We live in a chaotic world. There's a lot of stresses, a lot of anxiety. So we're in this particular moment of immense uncertainty, and that causes a lot of pressure that we actually feel inside our brains and our body. We are social creatures. Even those of us who are the most introverted, we seek human connection, and it's the very first thing that we do when we feel that we are in crisis. So I refer to pressure as sort of being in the hot cooker of uncertainty, confusion, stress, anxiety, fear, and all the emotive states that we have. It's a time when people are very distracted, and there's biological proof and reason for that. In our modern day culture, we sort of are managing perceived threats and actual threats. And what I mean by that is you probably have heard of flight or fight before, and maybe you've heard of something deep within your brain called the amygdala. And the amygdala is constantly scanning to make sure that we are safe. The problem is that in our modern day world, our amygdala has a problem sort of discerning between actual threats, like someone having a gun to your head, to also perceived threats, which can be triggered by any sort of pressure or anxiety that we have. And so the amygdala begins to create, and our brain and our biology, and it's very complex, begins to sort of create, a chemical cocktail, if you will, of hormones and neurotransmitters. So when people are in this time of uncertainty, they're very stressed out and confused, and they're anxious. And what that does in our bodies is that diminishes our mental executive function, our capabilities to make good decisions, to have clarity, to not swing between emotions, right? And this is a moment when leadership, and I believe that all of us are leaders, especially in our nonprofit communities. We are caring for people. We are caring for the environment. We are caring for animals. We are doing the work of caring for how we live and operate in this planet. And so we have to show up in this moment. And what we need to do is not live in sort of this primal state, right? Where we either shut down, we hibernate, we freeze, we fight, we argue, right? We need to really embrace our more evolved state so that we can gain perspective, have understanding, and be grounded so that we can go forth and care for our communities and continue to do our work. So how we can do that, right? How do we get to center? How do we be centered, clear, concise, caring, and connected to community when, honestly, people are confused, they're scared, they're freaking out? One is to make a plan. And so I've created a document that is shared called COVID Plan Paper Wings. Can you go to the next slide, Cindy? Thanks. It's not time to enact the plan, right? This is going to take you through sort of step by step what you can do to be able to feel more grounding and clarity and get to a plan. the first thing to do is that you need to speak with your stakeholders. That's your staff, that's your colleagues, it's your funders, your donors, and it is your community. It is your clients, the people that you serve, right? So who do you engage to do volunteerism, to do, tree planting, stuff like that? It's your whole universe. Talk to them. How are you feeling? Try to understand this shifting landscape that we're in and how they're reacting. People are all over the map in terms of what they believe about COVID, about social distancing, about, is this just a 2 to 4 week pause? Some people, right, are saying that this is systems change on a massive level, and it will forever change the way that we work. So people are all over the map. The important thing is to read into your community. How are they feeling? What are they doing? The next thing is to gather data, right? Somebody in the organization should be paying attention to the news. What is shifting? What is happening? And then to begin to say, okay, now that I kind of understand in my universe, right, where people are at and really listening to their perspectives and what they might need, how can my nonprofit pivot in this critical moment? Because it won't be business as usual. And I'm worried for those smaller grassroots nonprofits that do incredible work that they may not have enough cash flow. They may not be able to pivot and adapt their service delivery model in order to meet the needs of their mission, right? And so we know we're going to get through the other side, but we need to have a plan. So one way is to identify your secret sauce. As an organization, as community leaders, what are you exceptional at? Okay. And then we move down to what is the fifth green bullet on the page. How do we adapt and shift our thinking in this moment? What do we have to assess in order to create making an impact? How do we leverage what is our secret sauce, the thing we're super good at? And then how do we pivot in our service model? Having a plan, it's a contingency plan, right? To keep people moving forward, to provide them with hope, and honestly, to keep them grounded in a very uncertain moment. And then it becomes, how do we finance this? How do we communicate it to funders, to our stakeholders, to our community? And then overall, when do we enact this plan and shift if we need to in the moment? Like I said, this goes pretty fast through a plan. The first thing, though, is to really be that leader, that conscious leader for your organization, and to understand where people are at and that they're spinning, they're distracted, they're worried, right? So for you to maintain composure and grounding and perspective is really critical and key. So within the PDF, that's the handout that will be emailed to you, that's sort of on your sidebar right now. Thank you, Cindy, for moving to that. It sort of moves you through a series of questions that you can ask. It's only 2 pages. It needs to be amenable enough that it'll work for you and your organization. And again, just that idea of being prepared and being someone who is communicative in this uncertainty. Don't freeze, don't hibernate, don't get riled up in the fight just yet. But, be clear, be grounded, and above all, be caring, right? Provide hope. It is actually one of the things that we have within our biology. Humans have metacognition. We get to think about thinking, which gives us a deep level of self-awareness in order to be able to make changes and behavior changes within ourselves and hopefully impact our communities. The second thing we have is the gift of stories. We're the only animals on earth that communicate through stories. Listen to stories, hear the stories of people and how they're feeling, and how stories are really shaping their mindset. Think about the story that you tell yourself in this. What aren't you seeing? What about your story and idea about this provides you hope? And that gives me to my third point, which is the unique gift to humans, is that we actually have built in us an optimistic bias. We have vision, we have belief that we can improve the future, and we ultimately have hope. And so that's what we need to provide in this time, while also being real and while also having a plan. Thank you.
Wow, thank you very much, Katie. I think we all needed to hear that. That is giving us that piece of hope. the idea of having a plan, we're going to probably want to talk about this more in the next session too. And I'm just going to toss this out there because Sarah was talking to me a little bit about your talk with another group, saying that when you're talking to funders, you need to be authentic as well as competent, which I thought was a great piece of a plan. So we'll get to that more at the end. Now we're going to move on, and hold on a second. Again, I'm new at this. So now what we're going to do is we're going to have Lucy talk. Lucy is with the California Association of Nonprofits, and she's the policy director there. Chuck had been talking to California Association of Nonprofits and said, well, hey, wouldn't it be great to have, by the way, let me just give a plug for the California Association of Nonprofits. We're the network for the urban forest groups, right? And we have a network of 80 to 100 groups. And then I was talking to Jan Masaoka when I first started working at Relief, and I said something about having to talk to all our network members. And she said, well, California Association of Nonprofits has over 10,000 members, Cindy. And I sat there and thought, oh, wow, it's nice to have a smaller group. But in any case, because California Association of Nonprofits is so big, they are very much involved in policy here at the state capitol. And Lucy, you could even talk about, are you doing stuff federally and what's happening with respect to all this? Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Cindy. So yes, I'm Lucy Salcido Carter with Cal Nonprofits, and we are a statewide policy alliance of more than 10,000 organizations. And we see ourselves as being a voice for California's nonprofit community. So we do a lot of advocacy. We're still a small shop, so a lot of our work is focused on the state level. But I thought I'd talk to you today a little bit about what's happening at the state level and a little bit about what's happening at the federal level. And then there are some things that you all could be doing to support some of this work. So I'll start with what's happening in Sacramento. Recently, the governor enacted Senate Bill 89, and that allows for a lot of emergency funding to go to a wide range of stakeholders. It's $500 million currently allocated, with the option of additional allocations of $50 million chunks up to $1 billion. Nonprofits are specifically mentioned in the intent language in that bill. So that was really good that we got in there. The rub is that there's nothing in the bill that says in detail how the money is going to be used. So I think that's where there are opportunities for nonprofits to weigh in to make sure that we get some of that funding. And I'll stay on Senate Bill 89 for just a minute. One of the things that we're doing is advocating to make sure that we get a chunk of those funds. And one way that you can jump in to help with that is to reach out to your local legislator and say that you work for a nonprofit, that you volunteer for a nonprofit, and that nonprofits are a critical sector in the economy, that they employ people in the state. In fact, we're the fourth largest employer by industry in the state. I think a lot of people don't realize that. And that we really do need to be at the table to decide how the emergency funds are spent, and that a good portion of them go to nonprofits. So that would be great, because although we operate at the state level and are connected to what's happening at the federal level, we can't be doing the county by county and city by city work that you all can do locally. So that would be an ask that we have. And we have put together a sign-on letter that I'm sure many of you have seen. If you haven't, please go to calnonprofits.org. You have until 6 p.m. tonight to sign on if you haven't already. That letter is going directly to the governor, to the Senate President Pro Tem, to the Assembly Speaker, and to the two budget chairs, so Assemblymember Ting and Senator Mitchell. And it does lay out 5 recommendations that we're making that they consider. And I'll just go over them really briefly, because you can look at this online, but we are concerned about organizations that have existing government contracts and their ability to deliver on those contracts. So we're asking that the government continue to pay on those contracts, regardless of whether the nonprofits can accomplish those deliverables. We're also asking that nonprofit leaders be able to move budget line items because programs are shifting so much in response to the virus. We don't want nonprofits to lose any of that money. We want them to be able to decide how to shift those resources to where it's most needed so that they can serve the communities in the best way right now. We also want to make sure that nonprofits as employers, tenants, and utility ratepayers are protected, and that if there are going to be protections for for-profit folks, that nonprofit folks are included in that. And we also want to make sure that if there are particular kinds of certifications that nonprofits need in order to be able to do their work, that because of all of the changes happening with restaffing and shifts in staffing, that there be some flexibility around certification. And then the fifth one is, of course, that new emergency funds are available to nonprofits so that they can continue to respond in the way that nonprofits always do when there's a disaster. So those are the 5 recommendations. It would be great if you want to sign on. We have at least 850 organizations and individuals that have signed on so far. So that's really, those are some things that you can do. There's another bill that's been passed recently that focuses more on making sure that schools and after-school programs are protected. That's Senate Bill 117. I'm not going to go into that in any detail except just to say that because of closures, schools aren't going to be able to make some of their apportionment requirements. You know, how many children are in the classroom at a certain time. If the schools are closed, obviously they can't do that. So it's thinking about those requirements and being flexible with those. Then there was an executive order that the government passed allowing local governments. So this is a third thing that I'm now talking about, to allow local governments to decide to disallow evictions and foreclosures. There's also a bill in the works to have that be statewide, because there are some concerns that local governments aren't acting fast enough to stop evictions and foreclosures, and nonprofits, will be facing, for some nonprofits, that'll be, a real concern. So that's a third thing that's in the works. The other thing that's happening is that there are now small business loans available for nonprofits. They are low interest. They're not no interest. They're currently low interest at 2.75%, and that is available to nonprofits of all sizes throughout the state. So those are just, 1, 2, 3, 4, plus the work that we're doing, 5 things that are happening at the state level. And right now, the legislature will be on recess until mid-April, and who knows, maybe they'll adjust that as they go. But so bills aren't happening, but there's still a lot going on, particularly with regard to how those emergency funds are going to be used. So that's the state level. Let me just take a couple of minutes to talk about what's happening at the federal level. We don't do as much advocacy at the federal level, but we do count on our national network to do a lot of that. There have been 2 bills passed so far at the federal level. And the first one focuses on research for a COVID-19 vaccine. The second, and that was passed in early March 8th. The second one is the one that was just signed by the president yesterday. And that one is the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. And that one does have some considerable protections in it that are going to be helpful for nonprofits and for nonprofit employees. There's paid leave in there, guaranteed paid leave. There's family leave in there. There's stepped up support for nutrition programs, including for children, families, and seniors. There's funding for emergency unemployment insurance to make sure that states are able to meet unemployment needs. part of that money is for infrastructure, and part of that is actually money to go to the states to pay those claims. There is a third bill in the works right now, and we don't know yet what it's going to be. So stay tuned for more on that. It looks like there may be some loans for small businesses and nonprofits that will not have to be repaid, but don't know the details about that. So, but stay tuned on that. I feel like that's probably more than enough information right now, but let me just encourage you again to reach out to your local legislators and let them know that you think nonprofits need to be at the table to figure out how those emergency funds are going to be spent, and that a good portion of that money needs to go to nonprofits to continue to do the amazing work that we do. So thanks a lot. I'll take questions later.
Cool. Thank you very much, Lucy. That was a lot of information in a very fast amount of time. I'm just sitting here thinking that we will definitely be needing to put this information down where people can get to it and see it. And I guess I'm just going to ask a question right off the bat. As far as talking points for people to go talk to their local legislators, is Cal coming up with those talking points?
You know, I would recommend that you go to our website and look at the sign-on letter. And in that sign-on letter, there are the 5 key things that we're asking for that I mentioned just now. And in addition, there's some data points about the important role that nonprofits play in the state. And you can use those as leverage. I mean, they're really remarkable. Like nonprofit activities generate 1/6 of the state gross product each year. I mean, we really are a fundamental part of the economy. And I think that political leaders don't necessarily understand that. So there's some great talking points that you can use to just remind people how important nonprofits are. You know, we provide all kinds of essential services, but we also provide a lot of quality of life services that, you know, depending on how you define essential, you know, are really important for all of us. So that's what I would recommend, and it's all on one sheet of paper, so it's really easy, cheat sheet. So I would start there.
Okay, great. And in a second, we're going to jump to Chuck. I just have to say one other thing, though, and that is a loan that doesn't have to be repaid. That sounds like a gift.
Well, yeah. So I think it's going to be, and I can't remember what in particular it's going to be. They're small business loans for let's see. You know, we just heard about it today, and it's a work in progress. So, you know, for now, I would stick with the information that we know has come down through the state, you know, via the state from the feds, which is that there's the low interest loans that are currently available. And until we hear what's happening with that third federal bill, I think it's important for humans to hope, but I don't want to lead people astray on that. So let's put a pause on that until we hear more. Yeah. And we did put up a 1-page summary in our resource section of our website that summarizes the second federal bill that I mentioned, the Families First Coronavirus Response Bill. And that too is like a 1-pager. So if you just need some quick information to understand, it's in, you know, plain language. I mean, I looked at it this morning and it was really helpful. That will explain the paid leave, the family leave, the increase in supports for nutritional programs and that kind of thing, increase in coronavirus testing funds as well. So those are a couple of resources.
And what we'll do too, here at Relief, we've often talked to Jan and Cal Nonprofits about just taking some of those resources and sharing it with our network, some of which are tiny and don't belong to Cal Nonprofits. So we will go ahead and make sure that we make that available as well. So thank you very much.
Please do. Okay.
Cool. And then the other thing that we're going to do is we're going to have Chuck talk. And I did not get Chuck's picture where he's dressed as Gene Simmons. So we're just going to take a peek at, this is a tree planting event, and Chuck's going to talk about grants. So we'll use this. Chuck, are you there?
I am, thank you. And I do want to follow up a little bit with some of Lucy's comments. I really want to thank California Association of Nonprofits for joining us today. As everyone on the call is aware, particular language, particular budget items just don't magically appear more often than not in public policy. And just like we have successfully fought to get urban forestry funding in some budget bills and some other policy pieces, California Association of Nonprofits, they're really the ones going to bat to make sure that nonprofits are being integrated into relief packages like SB 89 passed at the state level. And taking a cue from that and reemphasizing what Lucy was saying is that this is an opportunity for everyone to be local champions as well. There are stimulus packages and pandemic relief packages being passed at the local level. In Sacramento, we had $1 million set aside for small business loans of $25,000 each, first come, first served basis. Again, because of CAN's working, because one of their lobbyists is located in Sacramento, they were able to get nonprofits into that mix. So that's something that you can do at the local level, is find out what's happening at the local level with these kinds of stimulus packages and get engaged and make sure that your organization can be at that table. The only other thing I'll just mention on policy is that, a lot of what Lucy discussed really revolved around supporting nonprofits. And then there was an environmental justice piece in there as well, in terms of an update on what's happening in policy. And, Cindy and Mario and I talked actually earlier today, and we are pivoting to really address those two main things during this time. The pieces that we've supported over the last week have included making sure that there's no residential water shutoffs across California. We've signed on to support, the ban on evictions during this time, to make sure that there's walking space and parks are being utilized in a conscientious and courteous fashion. But then also, talking with California Association about nonprofits of how we can also help their work in supporting nonprofits at the state level through a variety of sources that, if they don't happen immediately, that in the foreseeable future. With that, I will pivot to what's happening with grants. And I think one of the things that we wanted to do immediately was within our power is look at deadlines that we had on our grant programs that were imposed by us or that were imposed by CAL FIRE. Immediately, we were able to adjust a couple of things. So we do have some grants that were due Sunday. We moved that back to mid-April. You should have seen an announcement about that was sent out by Marielle, I believe, yesterday or day before yesterday. So now our Arbor Week grants that are funded through the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, those are due April 17th. So a little extra time there. And then the projects themselves would continue through October 31st. We were not in a position to be able to unilaterally extend one of our grants we have going right now in urban forest management. However, with big kudos to CAL FIRE, within about 2 hours time, we put together an extension on that grant program as well. So trees that had to be planted by May 3rd now have through October 31st. So that gives everyone a bit more breathing room. On our forest improvement grant, we had already extended that once. Those projects are due to conclude March 31st. We didn't tamper with that because there were only a couple weeks left, but we will certainly entertain calls from folks if they find themselves in any hardships. As looking at what's moving forward at the state level in terms of grants, where I know there'll be probably even more focus in light of what's going on globally and certainly in California. One of the programs that I know a lot of our network members are interested in, the Urban Greening Grant Program, they have postponed the request for proposals on that. Workshops were scheduled to start next week, including a webinar, I believe, on March 26th. All of that has been delayed. So no update yet on when that will roll out. Folks may be aware, of course, that the CAL FIRE grant program is moving forward. I believe applications are due April 16th. We have not heard anything from CAL FIRE about an extension on that deadline. However, if we do, getting information, we'll certainly convey it to the network, as I'm sure would CAL FIRE. A little more about that program. And I guess this may have been a bit fortuitous on our part. We did apply for a significant grant in that program, actually the maximum, $1.5 million. We were invited to come back and apply for a full proposal. So I'm working with my colleague Sarah on putting that proposal together. And the reason that I mention it is that earlier today, Sarah and I did talk, and we are going to try to reframe how that grant looks in terms of the typical pass-through grant program that we have, which many of you are familiar with. They're just smaller grants to nonprofits to focus on tree planting, with often an education component, and of course the need to reduce greenhouse gases because of the funding source. But in light of where we anticipate several groups will be in the months ahead, we are going to try to see what we can do about reframing some of the narrative in there to speak to need for community rebuilding and providing opportunities for that within the grant. Obviously, we're working within fairly tight parameters because of the budget source, and of course because of the guidelines and parameters that are issued by CAL FIRE. But to their credit, they continue to be one of the easiest state agencies to work with. I think very sympathetic to what's happening right now, and if we can make those grants some kind of vehicle for folks to regain even a little bit of footing, that will be our goal. I think right now that's what I've got on grants, but of course we've got a fair amount of time for Q&A, so I'll be happy to field questions then as well.
Wow, wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank all of you. This has all been great information and a lot of it. I think everybody's probably processing. This is really your time to ask questions. So far, nobody has posed a question. I suspect it's like me. You're just kind of absorbing everything that came through. Yeah, I was just sitting there thinking about the CAL FIRE grant that's due the middle of April. It may be that they feel with everybody working remotely, they have enough time to finish it, but we'll see. And the other thing that has come up as a question from time to time, and I know that we said that you could submit questions, but we have various groups on the phone. Has everybody, I'd be interested to know if people have continued with tree planting events, or are you simply continuing with tree care going out there individually? I would think nobody is doing tree planting events, but I wanted to double check. And other than that, who else has questions?
Hey, Cindy, this is Chuck. While we're waiting for questions to come in, I will note that I know one of the challenges has been that a couple of groups that we work with, including grantees, we're trying to move forward with tree plantings. I even heard from one yesterday that had some suggestions on how to work with the social distancing factor. Since so many of the tree plantings are on public property, the local government decisions are happening so quick that it can be a matter of just a couple hours before that just goes in a different direction. And that was the case with a group in Pomona who had some great tips on how to still do safe, effective tree plantings in terms of making sure that an agent of Clean and Green Pomona was handling all the sign-ins, so the pen and paper wasn't being handled by all the volunteers, asking folks to bring their own water and snacks rather than that being provided in an open setting, asking volunteers that are already in close quarters, either family members, roommates that were coming out en masse for the volunteer events, to assign them to the same tree or group of trees rather than the normal commingling that would happen at events. I think those are still good suggestions if tree plantings are going forward, but I know with so many of our stuff occurring on public property, local government obviously has a say in that.
Yeah, and the other thing, of course, was a lot of times they wanted to engage school children on their events, and schools been stopped. We do have a question, and it's saying, is there any indication that the state or counties will relax essential activities definitions to allow for watering sites? Chuck, I'd like your opinion on that. I definitely have an opinion on that, but again, I haven't heard anything from the state or counties specifically with that.
No, I haven't either. If I had to speculate, which is all I really can do right now, I would say that that level of detail hasn't really gone through the upper chambers of decision making yet. Certainly at the local level, I know what we've seen in Sacramento is a focus on how do we help small businesses, how do we get the homeless sheltered, even in an emergency capacity, and of course seek funding from the state and federal government to support what needs to happen at the local level. So my guess is that that kind of thinking really hasn't even begun to filter up in this case to the decision makers.
That being said, I think we've talked about it a little bit at the office where if we're getting advice that says it's okay to go take a walk in the park as long as you're far enough away from other people, then I would imagine going to water trees, especially if you're not doing it in a group, which sometimes you've got volunteers that do them as individuals anyway, that could be that you could A, consider it an essential activity because it is taking care of infrastructure, and B, you're kind of doing what they're telling us to do, which is to get outside. Hold on a second. Because we're not stating names here, if the person who wrote that question has any thoughts about that further, please let me know. But I think that's a gray area on watering trees, frankly. And the other thing, I have to tell you that there was something in the newspaper here in Sacramento when they said that we were going from being a stay home to being a shelter in place, which is more quarantine. Somebody said, well, what are they going to do? Go out and arrest people? And in the paper, what it said was, no, they really don't want to go arrest people, but what they wanted was for the bars and restaurants to close. So I don't think somebody with a watering can, I suspect you'd be okay. I mean, I just think that's based on that kind of information. We have another,
Could I comment on this? Just
yes.
To be clear, the current national guidelines from CDC and which the president talked about in one of his previous conferences, CDC is advising gatherings and to limit gatherings to 10 people, but the governor's directive from last night, the shelter in place means to avoid going out except for the walks we talked about, which is kind of are on an individual basis, but to avoid going outside of the home except for the essentials of getting food. As you said, going for a walk is allowed, even encouraged, and getting medication. So I don't see, based on federal and state guidelines, I might have misheard that there would be any tree plantings that would be consistent with that guidance.
So let's be clear, though. I think the question wasn't about tree plantings at this point. It was about watering trees that have already been planted.
Yes, I thought we're watering, but before that, I thought there was something you were asking about tree plantings.
No.
Okay.
I misspoke. We don't think people should be having tree plantings at this point. But a lot of people are concerned about the trees that they've already planted, and we are heading into summer, and we need to water those trees to make sure that they survive, especially the young ones. So. Okay, and then we have another question. Thank you, Neal. We have another question which has said that Your Children's Trees has canceled all activities until the state emergency is lifted. We did have the capacity to continue with CCC crews, but that isn't really in the spirit of the emergency. And then another one says that ISA, the International Society for Arboriculture, wait a minute, and the TCIA, Tree Care Industry Association, sorry, it's a very small window, has declared tree planting as a non-essential activity. I hadn't heard that. So that's been declared as a non-essential activity. I guess the question is, have they declared watering trees an essential activity? And then we've also got, from Sacramento Tree Foundation's perspective, the Sac County's order restricts employees that are not in essential industries from participating at all except from working at home. There's a difference between voluntary watering and staff doing the work, I'd guess. Okay. I think we're right at the point where I don't see any other questions at this point. Let me scroll down. Are there any other questions from any of the panelists based on what you've heard today?
Cindy, could we ask Katie a little bit more about talking to donors, like you mentioned earlier, and how to approach those conversations?
Good. Okay, but before I do that, another thing came up that was on the tree planting thing, and I just want to make sure I catch it. And then we'll have Katie talk about that. I have to say, GoToWebinar is really cool, but it can be really difficult to read the questions on this box because it jumps all over the place. Somebody's saying, how can I, hold on. How can we support efforts to ensure the administration prioritizes funding for nonprofits? I know signing on to the California Association of Nonprofits letter and reaching out to lawmakers were mentioned. Given that $1 billion is at stake, it's really important that we engage. So not, and then it goes on to say, not specifically a question for this. We agree. Yeah. And especially since a lot of that money was kind of like, almost like a blank check. It didn't have any guidelines at all at the beginning. Another question was, what more can be done to save small nonprofits from going under once the inevitable financial collapse happens or occurs? As you know, in the last Great Recession, state-funded projects were frozen and entire organizations were affected.
Cindy, this is Chuck, and obviously if Lucy has a perspective, I'd like her to chime in as well. So yeah, it is definitely two different scenarios. The state used to essentially bank on bonds being sold after projects were already administered funds. They learned their lesson that was not the best way to do business, and so I think it's called the California Pooled Money Investment Account shifted to where now that the money has to be in the account before the projects can go forward and the funds be allocated and expended. And that was also a product of a lot of bond funding. Prop 68 is the only existing resources bond right now that has any significant funds in it. And like I said, the Pooled Money Investment Account has changed the practices so that we hopefully would not have that scenario again of projects being stalled because of lack of bond funding, because bonds simply weren't being sold, and the state had a not as fantastic credit rating at that time. So what we do have now, especially with urban forestry grants, are being primarily funded through the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, and those funds are only expended after there's been auctions and the proceeds are collected at the Treasurer's office and put into the fund. Now, it is absolutely likely that with this current situation, auction proceeds will be down perhaps dramatically in May, which could affect allocations available for these purposes. But so while I can't answer the question regarding how do all small nonprofits stay afloat during this time in a very large-scale way, I can say that we should be able to avoid that scenario that we had in the last recession where bond dollars that had not really come to materialize were still being spent.
Okay, cool.
I mean,
Another question.
I don't think this is Lucy. I mean, I feel like at least for us, we're kind of taking it day by day and trying to respond with what's in front of us right now. I know that we do have some articles. If you look on our website, I believe there's some articles about past recessions and how nonprofits have fared. But let's see what we can do with the opportunities we have now, and then it's scary to think about those next possibilities, but at least there are some really great things we can do now.
Cool. Thank you. And thank you for mentioning those articles as well. There is another couple comments or questions. It's actually a request. Chuck, I think this is going to come down for you and Mariela. Not specifically a question for this call, but could California Relief put together talking points on how urban forestry can benefit the post-COVID relief? That would be great.
Yeah, so obviously give Mariela an opportunity to chime in. That was a little bit of the conversation that I was having with Sarah earlier today as we're putting together our grant, is framing and narrative around the subject and what this could mean for the future. I think there's a possibility there. Certainly we've seen some of the environmental benefits that have come from the stay-at-home practices that have been implemented. Folks have probably seen, I think in Italy, the fact that the canals had clear water, like for the first time ever that anyone could remember, and you could actually see the fish in the clear stream. So if we can talk about this in a way that demonstrates that the environmental benefits do tie back to creating stimulus and economic opportunities. I know on a call I was on today, and Mariela was as well, there was further discussion about this. That would be great. Mariela, do you want to chime in as well?
Sure. The other discussions that I have heard of or been a part of have been kind of showing the parallel between taking action with COVID-19, which is a crisis, and drawing a parallel with climate change, how climate change is also a crisis, and kind of speaking to early investments, the needed early investments in climate change and the early need of investments in our public health aspect and our public health system to continue services and so that the environment can benefit the people that are living in it. So that's what I've heard, the conversations I've been a part of. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you both. We have a couple other comments coming up. This one says, a comment in response to volunteers watering. Perhaps this is an opportunity to engage the public, asking them to voluntarily water trees near their homes. It is a potential opportunity to educate and engage at community levels. That's a great idea. Kind of like sheltering at home, but also staying nearby and taking care of that, your trees nearby. Then another question came up was, does Relief have a one-pager on the public health benefits of trees that may encourage residents to support planting more trees, especially at this time? We have a couple different one-pagers, one of which, and we have them on our website too under tabs about what's public health and what's not. The Power of Trees handout that we have covers most topics, not just human health, but there's other resources available. Give us a call and we'll talk about how we can put something else up on our website about that. Thank you for the question. We're coming close to our, we're at 1:59. We're coming close to our 2-hour limit on this. If there are other questions, let's go ahead and put them in. Are there any other further comments from the speakers? The slides.
Yes, I wanted to say just this. Oh, sorry, this is Lucy. I wanted to say something really quickly around funders. Can I? Okay, good. I'm a former funder, and we've been working really closely with the funder community. They're nonprofits, and I know they're really working on some good practices that they can implement during these times. But Chuck and I had a conversation about this. One of the things that we've been talking to funders about, and that you all can do with your private funders, private foundation funders, is ask for general operating support. Ask if you can convert some of your grants to general operating support grants, the ones that you've already got, and then as you go seeking new funding, so that you've got the flexibility to take on leadership in real time around what your organization needs. So I just wanted to put that in as a quick plug.
Because you think that they would be open to that idea given the current circumstances?
Very much so. There's some of the major foundations are issuing some recommendations to their colleagues about how to move forward, and this is one of them, that they shift existing grants to general operating support, and that can help keep some of the smaller nonprofits afloat if they don't have to be trying to accomplish project-specific activities that are really impossible under the current circumstances.
Cool, and thank you very much for offering that information, Lucy, because that reminded me that I was supposed to pull Katie back on and talk about how to talk to funders as well. So we are going to go over a little bit, and so I hope if you can stay, great. If not, this will be sent out and it is being recorded. So Katie,
this is Lucy. I'm sorry, this is Lucy. I'm going to have to jump off. It's been wonderful being part of this. Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, Lucy. Take care.
All right. You too.
Does anybody else have thoughts? Yeah?
I was going to say, this is Katie. I work with a lot of funders as well. And, they want to fund. They want to figure out how their dollars can be best used right now. As I'm talking to nonprofits, right, like the number one thing is we need cash. We need cash. And so my response to that is funders are, I think at this moment, are scrambling, that they're also working, strategically as well to find sort of emergency pots of money and to adapt the way that they're giving. But I think that nonprofits need to be prepared to show how they are adaptable in their service and delivery model to respond to their communities and their mission in this moment. And so one thing is to have a really clear, concise ask that says, here's what we're doing, here's why, briefly, and here's the, and sort of in that why, here's the data that we used to come to sort of this decision making. And it's both a sincerity and a competency ask. So sincerity, right, means that I'm truly trying to do what I can to care about my people, and you can trust me because I've been doing, this type of work for a while. And then the competency part of it, right, is the actionable. This is what we're going to do. This is how it's going to look. This is the outcome that we hope to see. I think a lot of nonprofits just kind of do the sincerity-based ask all the time without really sort of putting forth that competency-based ask. Funders are going to need both in this moment, and probably just 1 to 2 sheets of paper, right? So again, like, talk to your funders, tell them what you're doing, how you're adapting, but be really clear and concise about what your ask is.
Cool. Let's just absorb that for a second, and I'm double checking to see if there's any other questions. Again, let me scan the panel. Lucy left, but Desiree, Neal, do you have any closing thoughts?
No, I don't think I have anything to add. It's been good to hear all these perspectives.
Likewise, Cindy, excellent call today, and the feedback from the field has been really extraordinary. So keep up the good work.
Chuck?
No, I try to limit my number of coherent thoughts per call, so I'm good.
All right. Again, and Katie, thank you very, very much for that information. And I'm just gonna, so what we have on the screen now, the last thing is that we've been collecting some of the information that's come down, and we're gonna be putting it under resources. This is a screenshot of our website. So when you go to our website, resources is where you normally find things. And then, hold on, I'm clicking ahead. We're going to have, instead of the last time we had a new here, it was about planning. We're going to have something up in the next 2 days, which is about COVID-19. And some of the resources that we've talked about today will be there, as well as others. Some of them will be links. Most of them will be links, actually. But if you come across anything that you think we should share, please let us know. Our numbers are plastered on our website, and call us. And then lastly, this is just calling for follow-up questions to me and Chuck, but I think you may have noticed earlier, if you want to get in touch with Katie for any reason too, her contact information is on the slide show, or you can just call us and we'll give her information to you if you're looking for that. Thank you very, very much, all of our great panelists. This was information packed. With all the distractions going on, as Katie said, it wasn't really clear how much we were going to have today as far as I was concerned, and this was way over the top. This was extremely helpful and excellent. Thank you very, very much. Y'all take care, stay clean, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye now.